All right. Well, welcome, everybody. I'm glad that you're here. Sometimes we have good options in life, and sometimes our options are just not so good. But alas, even when the options are not in our favor, that doesn't really excuse us from the necessity to make a decision. And that's why today's topic is how to make a bad decision and why sometimes you really have to. You may remember the movie Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. And at one point, they're trapped on a cliff by the posse that's been chasing them. And they're looking down into the Snake Canyon 300 feet below and raging rapids. And you know, Butch Cassidy, you know, Paul Newman is saying, well, the way I can think of it, we've got three options. We can fight. You know, they might kill us. They could starve us out. They could start a rocket slide. And the Sundance Kid says, well, they could surrender to us, but I wouldn't think that's likely. But a good decision theorist always comes up with all options. Or we can give up and we go to jail. And Sundance says, well, I've been there. So what's left? Well, they could fight, die, give up, go to jail. Or they could jump off the cliff. And they say, well, if they jump off the cliff, they'll never follow us. Sundance says, how do you know? He says, would you make a jump like that? You didn't have to. He says, I have to, and I'm not going to. He says, don't worry. The fall will probably kill you. And he said, no, but I can't swim. Don't worry about it, because all of the other options are terrible. And this one offers a chance, not a great chance, but a chance of survival and escape. So they obviously picked that one, and it would have been a very short movie had they not survived, but they do. And that's kind of an example of the real world. A decision is a situation where there's more than one possible course of action, that we can form some kind of expectation about the outcomes, depending on the course of action we choose, and we can take a look at the consequences of those probable outcomes. And so that whether the decision's good, bad, or indifferent. Now, a good decision means that at least one of the possible courses of action will lead to an outcome with desirable consequences. But as we have seen, sometimes no such option exists. So that leaves us with the situation when all options stink, AOS. I've heard that used, sometimes soldiers use that. Because if no good choice exists, then the focus has to be choosing the one of the least bad or least wrong option. Sometimes there is a potentially good option, but the level of uncertainty is so high that you can't really tell what it is. And if that's the case, you're in the same boat. All decisions need to go through a decision process model, and a fairly standard decision process model begins with definition. What is it that we need to decide? Why do we need to decide it? Sometimes the best thing you can do is leave it alone. Otherwise, a choice must be made. Sometimes the failure to act also constitutes a choice. Framing the decision, what's the context? What are the circumstances? What is the space in which we live? There are a variety of methodologies and approaches to decisions, and you have to select the right one. No matter the methodology, generate alternatives to all the alternatives that you can come up with. You should always make sure that two of the alternatives are, number one, do nothing, because that's your baseline, and every choice or action that you take has to be compared to the baseline. You have to evaluate those, then you make a choice, and depending on the choice and whether it's irrevocable or not, you test, you evaluate, you watch to see what's happening, in hopes that if a mid-course correction is necessary, you'll be able to do that before your time or your window of opportunity runs out. So let's talk about how do we define a decision. Well, first, what is the choice? What's the decision? What should we do given that we're trapped on the cliff's edge? What do we do because we can't overpower the posse that's chasing us? What's at stake? And one way to do that is to ask yourself the two questions. What is the best possible outcome? The best possible outcome, we survive, we don't go to jail. What's the worst possible outcome? Well, we die and we go to jail. So I'm always remembered of Hermione in the Harry Potter things. We could die or worse, be expelled. What is the context in which the decision will be made? There's a time limit, a time horizon before the posse will take away some of our choices and options. Who's going to make the decision? Is it a command decision? Do we need a consensus, an agreement? Certainly Butch has already decided what he thinks that needs to be done, but he's got to talk Sundance into it in order for the decision to be effective. Well, what happens if we fail to decide? Sometimes paralysis through analysis is a very real problem, and most choices, most opportunities have a relatively narrow window in which they can be made. If you wait too long, if you ignore it too long, you're out of luck. As Doug Adams in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy reminds us, sometimes it's easier to come up with the answer than it is to actually know what the question is. So what are some frames on a decision? Environmental factors. What are the choices? What are the physical circumstances? Are there organizational factors? There are certain things that are politically possible or politically acceptable within a corporate organizational context. There are the choices that are off the table. Are there factors related to the mission? Are there acceptable costs depending on the goal of the mission and its relative importance? What is the quality of available information? We may have a lot of information, but it might not necessarily be any good. Accuracy is not guaranteed. It may be rumors or vague hints. What's the competition up to right at the moment? That should really affect what we do, but we can make educated guesses, but we really don't know. What's the quantity of available information? Is there a lot of data that we can massage and analyze and get into to try to figure things out, or there's a lot of information just utterly missing? Are there key pieces of information that are unknown or unknowable or unavailable? Now, this is a very sort of sad real-life story. I was told this by an attendee in a seminar that I was teaching. We came up, we were discussing decision theory. And this was during the Iraq War. At one point, this aircraft carrier had its fighters up, and they were supposed to patrol and interdict a particular area. And they saw a single car, speeding out across an open stretch of desert. Now, there are two possibilities. One is that the car is civilians fleeing the scene, and they've just unwisely wandered into a live fire zone. The other possibility, of course, is that they are, in fact, people who are trying to get behind enemy lines or their enemies and do sabotage or attacks, and in which case it's very dangerous. Clearly, there is a right decision to be made. The problem is we don't know what decision that is. If we knew for a fact that they are civilians, or we knew for a fact that they are enemy combatants, there is no problem. But now we are stuck. There are, if they are enemy and we fire on them, correct action. If they are civilians and we don't, we reject, we do not fire, and that's good. And then we can make either type 1 or type 2 errors, the failure to act when we should, or the wrong choice, or a choice when we shouldn't have. But we don't know what the answer is. And so now we have another textbook example of a bad decision. Now, in a case like that, there are two factors that you have to consider. Number one is the relative probability, given that we don't